I used to be so naive as to say that our type of agriculture was undeniably scale limited because people were smart enough to see through the titles, smart enough to see through the adjectives, weren't going to buy into those claims because they knew that they were effectively meaningless and had to actually know their farmer. I think that I've pretty well lost that hope. I think that the pandemic was an absolutely huge impetus for people to get out there and to pursue that path, but equally motivated were the big guys in creating these sub-brands and these greenwashed labels that portray themselves as being that when in reality it's just commodity production.
Welcome to the Regenaissance Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Griggs. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more. Welcome back to the Regenaissance Podcast, and today I have Evan Gunthorp of Gunthorp Farms. Thank you for joining me.
Yep, happy to be here.
So I actually had no plans to do this podcast with you initially because I came here to visit your father, but then after watching one of the YouTube videos you did on, I always forget that account now, Roots.
Breaking New Roots,
which if you haven't seen on YouTube, I'd highly check that out. It's a really awesome video. But then also just thinking about you as the son, and I know talking with Greg yesterday on the podcast, but then overall just talking about, the future of where this will go to. And he actually mentioned just what gives him a lot of hope is the future generations and thinking about you and whenever you take this over. So I thought, this would be an awesome conversation. So thank you for joining.
Good.
So I guess to get started, I know it's kind of a broad, vague question, but just curious to hear about just your experience growing up on a farm and in rural Indiana. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, looking back at it, I think that at the time, I thought it was a lot more normal than what it really was. Looking back at it, I think that there were very, very few kids cross country, few kids that I went to school with that had the upbringing that I did. We were probably poor for an awful lot of those years and didn't really know it and didn't know that there was anything different than anybody else's upbringing when I was out killing chickens in the front yard or, by 7 years old that I had 3,000 chickens at home that I was responsible for taking care of and ensuring that they stayed alive. But very, very much a positive upbringing. There were definitely bad days. There were days that Dad made us do things that we didn't want to, had more responsibilities than an awful lot of kids did at our age, which didn't, looking back, it's kind of easy to think that was a hell of a lot for a 7 or 10-year-old kid to take care of. But I think that it really helps in, future development and who I am today.
I'm curious because you were mentioning with the chickens and then by 7 having 3,000, because that's something that I see talked about a lot with farming is exposing children to animals and also just the end of their life at a very early age and how to a lot of people that just seems very wrong. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on all of that, especially that you were able to experience all that. Because to me, that is part of the disconnection from your food. But at the same time, I didn't grow up on a farm myself, so I don't know what that was like at a young age.
Yeah, I think it's a fine line to walk. And I think that growing up, I had probably a bit of what around here would be called a very hippie mentality in terms of how I looked at food and how I looked at how food should be raised, should be produced. Just because from before I was in school, we were out there killing chickens, helping process chickens that were going to sale, going to feed ourselves. So I knew that, even though day in and day out from these day-old little baby chicks that I had to take care of that were oh so cute and everything, through the entire production process, even on the days that I hated going out there, that everything was too hot, too smelly, whatever the case was, that, it was my job to nurture these animals, to keep them together. That was my responsibility to care for them. But ultimately that day was going to come when I had to look them in the eye and kill them as well. But I think that you get an awful lot more respect for the food and the process, that it's not just some unit of a commodity system that you're producing, that they actually are individual creatures. And it's a system that has much deeper implications, even if in the end, you're just going to slit their throat and eat them.
That's something that, because I was vegan for 2.5 years, but to me, again, that was because I was disconnected from my food. And then I remember it might have been a full year later, but I don't even think it was a year later. I was on a ranch in Colorado on the processing day. And I remember just seeing the pastures that they were raising their chickens on, and then talking to the farm owner, and then seeing the ceremony. He did this little ceremony of respect before, taking the lives of these chickens. And then also just actually having a bird for myself to take home for helping out and sharing that with my friends that were there. It really does add a whole new meaning and perspective and gratitude for it all. Because that's another thing that I think the biggest aspect that we've lost as a society is gratitude for our food. Even if you're not religious, the whole praying for your food and just being grateful for it, I think is really important. And also it just changed your perception of where your food comes from. I guess the type of food, quote, or not quote, example of just whatever animal that you're consuming. And then actually understanding that they gave its life to sustain you. And I don't know, it just changes your whole worldview of your food, but just the whole world essentially. And so I'm trying to figure out where I'm even going with that.
Well, I think that, I run processing plant. We're sitting in a USDA-inspected processing plant right here. And I have an absolutely wonderful staff to the extent that I don't have to come in and kill animals every single day. That I think that if I had to be the one that was coming in and every Monday, it was my responsibility to be the one running the stunner on 60 pigs. And it was my responsibility every time that we killed turkeys to be looking every single one of those animals in the eye and stunning them, being the one actually killing every single one. I think that I would probably go find something else to do. I can do it. I completely understand it, but I think that that's a really rough position for anyone to be in. But on that same line of thinking, I think that anybody who doesn't have the ability to do so, doesn't have the ability to look that animal in the eye, to take their life and to progress through the processing process, I guess, shouldn't be allowed to eat meat. I think that we'd be in a completely different position with our food production in this country, in this world, if everybody had to actually be the one to at least occasionally make that final sacrifice for that animal. I can't really even call it a sacrifice because the animal has no choice in the matter. But if you actually had to see that process through, I think that the every day leading up to that final end moment for that animal would be way, way more respected than what it is.
So you mentioned at an early age too, that you were just thinking about the quality and care of animals, but in agriculture in general. What are some of what is the agriculture that should be done moving forward?
I have my own perception of the way that things ought to be done. But I wouldn't, if I were king for a day, I wouldn't eliminate CAFOs or eliminate this chemical or that chemical or whatever the case may be. I think that we as consumers really have to come around to the fact that we vote with every single dollar that we spend. And if we are just going to Walmart and purchasing at the lowest price, we're making a very, very conscious, maybe not a conscious, but we're making a vote that goes very much in the wrong direction, in my opinion. I think that all animals should have something close to a natural environment to live in. I think the animals should be outside. I think that, the vast majority of pigs in this country never step off of concrete except for stepping onto a aluminum trailer that takes them to more concrete where they die. And I don't think that that's right. The actual specifics and minutia of all of the production practices, I think should be incredibly transparent, and the people should actually know what they're legitimately supporting rather than just buying into the marketing of whatever the term is for today. That is just so bastardized and so unrelated to the actual production practices.
On the topic of the CAFOs, especially for pigs, because that's why I was so thrilled to come here. I've been mutuals with Greg on Twitter for some time and just seeing what you all are doing. But actually, looking back, one of the reasons why I went vegan in the first place was seeing just the whole CAFOs for pigs, and then just learning how, they cut off their own tails and just in the horrific, stressful environments. And Greg made a good point yesterday that I also realized then was you could see in their eyes just how depressing and horrific that is for them, and they can express that versus outside. As Joel Salatin always says, let chickens be a chicken and pigs be a pig. Were you reading on that and seeing that growing up too? I'm just curious from your perspective growing up on a farm, did you still do your own research outside of the actual work, or were you just being a kid and wanted to do other stuff?
I wasn't doing a whole lot of research on it until I got into high school. High school had a big kick for a while on antibiotic resistance and some of the implications that has through the feeding of antibiotics to animals. But just growing up, we had a few other hog farms in the area. At that time, went to school with some kids that grew up on hog farms, which of course were entirely conventional, all of them in barns. I got to go to their places. I got to see those production practices and, could just tell that it wasn't the same as what we were doing. Fortunate to be exposed to a lot of different organizations growing up, to meet the chefs that praised so highly what we were doing. And in the early years of that, I didn't know why we were getting so much praise when we were just raising animals. I didn't know any different. And there towards the later years, it really started to click, started to make sense that what we were doing was really significantly different than what was normal.
during your high school, speaking of normal, what did you have like a typical day that you'd go to high school and then have to do a lot of outside work, or what was that like?
Yes, I played sports, ran track, ran cross country, played football and soccer for a couple of years. Yeah, I mean, typically it was pretty rare that I would get up before school, with the exception of my senior year when I only went half days. Pretty rare that I'd get up before school to do chores. It did happen on occasion, but would wake up, go to school, get done with school. I'd have practice or I'd have a meet or whatever the case was. And then I'd get home and I'd go take care of chickens until chicken chores were done. And then I'd do my homework and whatnot. If I did my homework, I quite frequently didn't. Towards the later years, junior year of high school, I started in the processing plant. We'd bought a new machine, I think around Thanksgiving time. And then that following spring, didn't really have anybody to run it. So I stepped in there, after my junior year of high school. I was running the part-time crew that were running that packaging machine. And then really by the time I went back to school, my senior year, was running the processing plant. So at that point, would wake up around 8, start plant production. 8 to 10 o'clock would be in the processing plant. 10 o'clock, I'd clean up, pack my lunch, go to school, back out of school, go to practice or meet or whatever, and then get back into the processing plant till the wee hours in the morning.
Was the high school you go to, was it just all the hours and you were able to get special time, or? I've never heard of that.
There was a program, ICE, I don't even know what it stood for, what it stands for now. That was basically like a work experience thing for half the day. So there were a few different programs through the school. They had some technical training, some vocational stuff. And then they had the opportunity that you would get a job. And in conjunction with this job for half of the day, you'd have a specific class at school with it. We'd learn some more real life skills. I think we did our taxes and some stuff like that in the class.
So I know as you're talking through your time in high school and working more in the processing plant, throughout this time, did you think that you were going to, want to eventually work on this farm and take it over long term?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what it would look like long term. High school, I really think I was kind of lost as to exactly what my position would be going forward. At that time frame, we had 30 or 40 employees, obviously the processing plant, the distribution, and the farm side. So I mean, I knew that there would be opportunity for me. Didn't really know exactly what that would look like long term, though. Graduated out of high school, got to the time frame that my sister was coming back from college. Her husband was in the operation. So, through all of the different family members, how we were working through all that, I didn't know exactly what my position would be, but always knew that I would be here on something.
And then, so you went to college, and then what year did you come back here?
I graduated high school in 2015. I went one semester there in the fall. So
I didn't realize whenever you said,
so that's so funny. By the end of 2015, I was back to the farm full time.
So why I'm laughing too for the listeners, I was talking to Evan yesterday and he mentioned that he dropped out, but I didn't realize it was only a semester.
Yeah.
That's funny. So you came back and then, I wish I would have asked your pops on that. Whenever you came back, what was that like? And what were you, wanting to do once you came back?
I think I had several months there that I didn't really know what was in store, what I was really doing. Was running the processing plant at that time. So, I had a full-time job, had plenty of projects and things that I wanted to commence making better. So, I mean, I easily filled up my schedule, filled up my time. But yeah, didn't really know where things were going, what I was going to do. Got fortunate there that started looking into some different certifications and stuff. The stuff that I really felt like I needed out of college that I wasn't getting and wasn't on my course schedule until I would have got to my third year, my last semester of college, that I finally would have got these actual leadership and management courses that I wanted. Found some certification classes to pursue that sort of thing. And then I think really started coming into the position that I spent 5 or 10 years in, of actually running the processing plant, focusing more on trying to understand the people element and the actual leadership and management. And then things just kind of progressed from there, I guess, as my sister and brother-in-law moved away from the farm. Had a farm crew there in his absence for a year or two. And then that kind of fell away and I stepped into more of the work on the farm, more of the leadership there. Quit the chickens after 2020 and brought the sheep on, and the sheep from day one when they came off the truck really fell under my responsibility. So have grown that. Now I run the processing plant. I oversee a portion of the pig production, then oversee our solar grazing.
So because you mentioned interesting over the 5 to 10 years of the processing, one of the things mentioning people, I guess, can you expand on that? Because even going back to your comment on it would be terrible to just be the one to stun cows every single day for weeks on end. Because when you think of the big slaughterhouses like JBS and Tyson, a lot of the slaughterhouse workers have horrific traumatic experiences, absolute depression. It's just really bad. And I mean, that doesn't surprise me at all. So I'm just curious, from your learnings and experiences through all that, how do you go about that as being the leader of the processing plant?
It's difficult. Processing and farming in general are low profitability industries from a get-go, and you'll get a lot of people that come around that say that they want to work on a farm. The number of those that actually will do the work of a farm are significantly fewer, but there are still people that have this idyllic mentality of what it's like to go out and feed animals every day and see the little animals. Nobody thinks of, hey, processing plant, that's got to be a great job, and it's really not. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's wet, and a good day in the processing plant, everything dies and it gets put into plastic. So it's not something that intrinsically gives people a lot of value. So you end up getting a significantly different staff than what you would in some specialized industries that people have real passions for. So I think that it was probably more of a hurdle, more of a challenge than what I could have had in different spots, and figuring out just the interpersonal skills was very, very difficult for me. I think the farmers in general end up being deficient in a lot of skills that would allow them to be better business owners. And I fully admit that I fall into that category, that I'm lacking in a lot of the interpersonal skills and some of the business, and definitely the marketing and sales stuff that would be probably more inherent to being a profitable business than just going out and being really good at raising animals.
Yeah, the whole labor topic is very difficult, because I actually made a post today on Instagram. There's a couple of farmers that were really angry about the whole ice raids that are going on right now, and they hired some Americans and that they quit. But then one of the farmers goes on and talks about how he was talking to some of the American farmers and telling them, if you're doing a good job and work as hard as these immigrants, that you'll be getting paid $75 to $100 a day. And he confidently said that with the camera, fully expecting people to accept that. That equates to $25,000 a year, and you're working 6 to 7 days a week. So what he's essentially saying, that, because it goes back to there's the labor problem, but to me, it's the economics of it all. And that helps solve the labor problem. And that's why the whole amnesty with the illegal is why I was posting on that for myself, because it's never going to solve the actual problem long term if we continue to do that, to where you're paying essentially your modern day slave owners, essentially, and in that regard. And he's just fully saying that because he also, the most ironic part is, both those farmers, if you look at that video, are so overweight, severely overweight. And so they're trying to tell us that we can't do the physical labor. Meanwhile, he's not doing the physical labor. He's paying slave wages essentially for hardworking immigrants, or they might not be immigrants, to do the work for him. And that's such a massive problem in agriculture. But then the media, it's very hard to, the media latches on, and it's a very polarizing topic right now. So that's why with processing, it's very challenging to have a good team, I would assume, because I don't know, I think about this problem a lot, is the labor itself, because I worked on farms and I talked to his owners, and they all say the same thing. It's very hard to find work, but then you can't convince somebody to work backbreaking work for 6 days for $25,000 when you could get a virtual assistant job sitting at your desk in AC. You could even do it from a library, making probably double that. And so then whenever you bring that up, of course, Americans aren't going to choose that. And that's something that I noticed the media, and especially the politicians, really gaslight us Americans into thinking that that's okay, and that we should continue hiring those workers and paying them essentially nothing. And most of the time it's under the table for cash. I guess my question with that, let's see, I'm not even that was just kind of a rant. I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on all of that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've definitely been challenged by. We're 15 miles or so off of the RV capital of the world, more trailer factories in Elkhart, Indiana than what there are anywhere else on the whole planet. And those jobs tend to be very backbreaking work. They have largely work on piece rates or large production bonuses that are a large portion of the compensation package. And those that are effective in that end up making or high five figures, low six figure salaries. So, I can't afford to pay just a processing packager or a meat cutter or anything without $100,000 a year. Even if they are super, super productive employees. So you end up with people that are capable of doing those jobs that are pursuing the money. You can't blame them that if you drive 15 minutes that way, you get a job for 100,000 when Evan's paying 50. Just doesn't make sense. But finding the people that value the work, that have a passion in what we are doing, and will hold that passion higher than the paycheck at the end of the week is incredibly difficult. And there's navigating that dynamic is an incredible challenge.
And I'm curious, growing up then, how did your father ever talk to you about all this? Because I always hear this to where a lot of times growing up, I mean, this is the previous generations to where they'll tell their kids to get an off the farm job and get a better paying career, essentially, because it's way less stress and physical labor, but then also more pay. I'm just curious whenever talking to your father, if he ever mentioned, the future, because I knew that he would, he wants you to take it over, but I was wondering if, that was expressed as you were growing up.
Wasn't something that we talked about a lot. I think that the big mentality that I held on the entire subject was really a result of that 2008 economic crash. While all of those trailer factories were dying, while I had kids that was going to school with whose both of their parents were immediately unemployed and were really struggling, was really in a big boom for the local food movement. So we actually did pretty well through that time frame. So there was a huge disparity that placed us actually above the local population for a short while. And then after, things started settling back down, and we had some brief discussions as a family as to what we were doing, and Dad had, made it clear several times that he was continuing to do this so that we would have the opportunity to continue to do so. But yeah, I don't know. We never really had any of the, harsh economic discussions. And I don't know if it would have been better if we did or didn't, how that would have shaped my mentality and what I would have done as a result.
It's interesting you brought up the impetus for you was the 2008 crash, because that kind of just reminds me of the pandemic, and there's quite a few people that started their own ranch, farm, or even just growing any type of food because of that. And so it's always in the disasters, it wakes you up to those things. And again, food at the end of the day, that's what has made us been able to advance so far now to where I've been able to connect with you from 16 hours away. All of that has only been possible because of our food. And that's why it's so funny with the whole veganism versus just eating meat argument is at the center of our diet for our whole existence has been meat. We've, of course, eaten all other kinds of foods. I'm not carnivore, so I'm not advocating for that. But I just always find that hilarious that predominantly we've been eating meat. That's how we've thrived. Well, that's how we survived and thrived and advanced now. And then now we have such an abundance to where it's interesting now. We have such an abundance to where it's created just massive new problems now. And now we have a very centralized system. We have, 4 big meat packers that control everything. You've got the CAFOs, but the system is so efficient to where you're churning out so many, say, cattle a day or a week to where you guys in your small processing facility wouldn't be able to keep up at all. So I guess with that, because I think about long-term, because for the consumers to understand, this does not change overnight. A lot of the effects we're facing has been because of the 70s and 80s and just so on and so forth for the consequences. And it takes decades to really face all of the repercussions. And now that so many are waking up to that, they still don't realize that if we got to fix that, it's going to take probably just as long, if not longer, because the problems are even, to me, they've only gotten bigger and more controllable from the powers that be. And so that's why I'm trying to go about it through the education aspect. And so I'm curious for you, whenever you're talking to, customers, I'm just curious, from just the people that you've talked to now, say versus 15 years ago and just the customers overall, how do you feel about the future of our food and just with where Americans are at with the connection to our food?
I don't know. I think it comes and goes in waves. I think that there's an awful lot of naivety from both sides. I used to be so naive as to say that our type of agriculture was undeniably scale limited because people were smart enough to see through the titles, smart enough to see through the adjectives that they didn't really mean anything through that whole progression of natural and antibiotic free and, cage free and all of this, that the smart consumers weren't going to buy into those claims because they knew that they were effectively meaningless and had to actually know their farmer. And there was only a certain number of people that can actually know that one farmer before that farm gets too big and those people lose those connections. I think that I've pretty well lost that hope. I think that the pandemic was an absolutely huge impetus for people to get out there and to pursue that path. But equally motivated were the big guys in creating these sub-brands and these greenwashed labels that portray themselves as being that when in reality it's just commodity production. So I think that we're probably catching more consumer demand than what we were pre-pandemic, but there's just so much more supply in the marketplace with very, very specific marketing that is targeting the niche that, so many of us have created over the past multiple decades.
Okay. Interesting. I'm going to try to make sure this segue actually makes sense. So going on to solar grazing, because it's making me think of sheep as one way, because the number of sheep in America is just sheep, lamb. I mean, most ruminants is continuing to dwindle because cattle is also the lowest inventory in decades. But with sheep too, it seems like that could potentially be an avenue to increase the herds, because solar grazing, whether it's good or bad, that's not what I'm trying to talk about right now. It's more of the fact that it is happening. And so what can we do for the land? There is solar on farmland, sheep. So I would love to hear just how the sheep grazing works. Because then before the podcast started, you also mentioned something really interesting elsewhere. To me, it sounds just a really interesting avenue to bring back sheep, but then also help graze the land and then also produce healthy meat for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we have the solar grazing because it is an opportunity to access more land. We're pretty well landlocked right here. 240 acres to purchase more land makes zero financial sense. So the solar grazing has given us the opportunity to graze more acres. 240 acres here, but we graze 900 acres of solar panels that are off the farm. The opportunities there are absolutely huge in terms of scaling the U.S. sheep flock. But I don't know. I don't know that I personally care as much about the products that we produce and the industry as a whole in these commodities as much as I do of the individual farming operations. I care more about the farmers than I do about the product that is being produced, I think. And the opportunities here for us to take land, in our case, that is just commodity corn production, which in my opinion is in most cases an ecological nightmare, to replace that with ground that is going to be grazed appropriately and to bring farmers along with that opportunity to get more access to acreage, to be able to grow their flock, to have larger flocks, more animals that they're selling. It's just an absolutely huge opportunity for us. For us, it has been the same grazing procedures that we follow here. We're running daily moves on the solar site, fairly high utilization. We do have to mow quite significantly. In addition to that, our contract is set up so that we are the solo vegetation manager of the entire site. So if sheep can't control it alone, we have to do supplemental mowing, which in our area with that big spring flush means pretty well regardless. You're gonna have to do a significant amount of mowing front loaded in the year. But I see it as an absolutely huge potential, huge opportunity for the farming operations to grow themselves and to have some diversity of income and an opportunity for the next generation to continue on the farm.
So because you mentioned that with the corn of the ecological disaster, that's interesting because what a lot of consumers, or I guess non-producers, view all the solars on farmland is an ecological disaster because of, storms wiping out the screens and what happens to the soil. I guess the biggest question is what these solar panels, what they might do to the soil and the biology under that. That seems to be the biggest concern. So I guess from the work that you're doing, is there any concerns that you see with that?
I can't really speak on it. Don't have the soil tests to say one way or the other. I haven't done enough research on my own. I know that the arguments of the panels breaking and putting all these heavy metals into the soil isn't realistic. Modern panels are silicon. They're not a legitimate issue. Biggest issue with panel breaking is the broken glass. The far bigger hazard across the entire site is the power that's getting produced, because these things are producing an awful lot of power. And if you get wrapped up in one of those wires that's bare, you will get an incredible amount of power running through you. But I mean, what I see on the site is that looking just across the fence from what is a very, very lush high legume pasture, lots of natives, tons and tons of coneflower on the site. Plenty of rodents going through. It's just crazy the number of insects that are on site. You always see raptors sitting on the fence posts the whole way around. Plenty of snakes. I've had one guy that's got sprayed by skunks a couple of times over there mowing. The wildlife on the site, I mean, it's just night and day difference between what is under those panels compared to just across the fence, what is monocropped corn. And the farmers over there do an absolute excellent job by modern standards of corn production. They till the hell out of that soil. They work it 3 or 4 times. They have the stuff leveled up. I mean, you could roll a golf ball across their fields before the thing is planted. Completely flat, completely even soil. And they produce a very, very nice looking corn crop. If you think that is what a nice looking corn crop is, when it is completely straight rows of just perfect corn and absolutely nothing else growing out there. I think that there are opportunities to do a lot better than that within the confines of corn production. But the reality is that in the vast majority of cases, it's not. Here in northern Indiana, the whole hour and a half drive that I have to the solar site, there's some Amish operations that have some animals outside. They have their horses, they have their chickens, they have whatnot, but it's completely insignificant on an acreage basis compared to all of the monocrop corn and soy. And it's difficult to see. It's difficult. Dad always says that the biggest exports from rural America have been the topsoil and the next generation. And I see those monocrop operations as being the worst example of that. That when they're heavy tillage, you can see the washouts that are going right into the culverts, right into the ditches that are in the same field where they have center pivot irrigation. And none of their kids come back. It's continually becoming a system of maybe the farmer still owns the land, but he's no longer the one that farms it. He's leasing it out to somebody else. There are 3 or 4 crop operations in our area that farm all of the ground.
Wow. I didn't even think about that, to where the farmer is no longer the farmer. So that's kind of just leaving me speechless. So I just had a question too with the solar grazing, but specifically with the companies that you work with. What's that process like? Because that's another thing too, is I'm sure there's some good solar companies out there, but I've also know that there's a lot of bad players out there, because I've read actual stories on that. And that's also what makes it so muddy from my perspective to try to figure out, because I'm not, again, doing any of the solar grazing. I'm not actually trying to work with them. So I'm just curious on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that there are good and bad ones out there. We've had very little experience with any companies, only working with one company right now.
Okay.
And they have been absolutely fabulous through the whole process. I didn't do a lot of the negotiations prior to going on site and all of the persistence to get us the contract that has allowed us on site. Dad did all of that. Sure. Since being there, they were very receptive during the construction process of the things that we would need to be able to graze the site correctly. They allowed us to make some decisions on the seed mix, to give some input there. They've been very, very conscious of their efforts in order to have these things be grazable appropriately. And it's a better environment for grazing at the solar site, I believe, than what it is here, because the sheep constantly have shade. They've got more protection than what they would here. And the vegetation on site has been absolutely awesome. That shading effect has worked absolute wonders for keeping the forage well vegetative far longer than what I'd be able to do here.
Are there any natural predators for the sheep around this area, to where are those solar panels protecting them from predators too?
There are fox and coyotes. We haven't seen any issues either here or at the solar site with them. Have seen plenty of fox at the site. We've seen a few coyotes there. But I'm of the opinion that we are the intruders into the area. I always used to say that on our chickens, that we undeniably had hawks and eagles and everything that were coming by taking chickens. We saw several of them, but if you've got 20,000 chickens in the field and you lose 5 a day, yeah, that sucks. But who's in the wrong here? Are we in the wrong for putting birds outside? Are we in the wrong for raising chickens to begin with? Is the hawk in the wrong for coming and stealing chickens that aren't his? I don't have a great answer on that, but I don't think that, there are predators around. We could take some mitigation strategies, could get a livestock guardian dog or anything, but so far haven't seen the need to do so. Haven't had any that I've noticed be taken and eaten or leaving parts around or anything. Wouldn't surprise me if we've had some lambs that have gone missing, but if they're taking a lamb a year and they're eating the thing, I'm not too worried about it.
And then going back to whenever you all signed the contract with the solar company that you're working with, and then you're mentioning how they allowed you to, really help out trying to build out the strategy around the solar farm, essentially. And then you mentioned that there was a mix that you planted. Was that correct?
They seeded the site, but we got to give them input on the actual plant species that they were putting into that mix.
Interesting. So that's just interesting that they were very receptive and listening. That I can really get behind. Because again, it's interesting. I read a lot on social media just overall with agriculture, but then things like solar panels, which is a very polarizing topic, because there's parts of the world to where there's some farmers that are being completely squeezed out by solar companies, but then there's ones like this to where it's actually pretty legit. And also the fact that a lot of farmland is not even being used currently. And so whenever you can have those solar panels there, at least you can still do some type of agriculture there. And like you just mentioned, all of the wildlife there compared to your neighbors is pretty drastic. And that's telling in itself. Because I always go back to, when thinking of wildlife, I always go back to Will Harris's book, A Bold Return to Give a Damn. He always talks about how he completely forgot how much wildlife he had on his farm until he switched to regenerative, because he used to go out every single day looking for stuff to kill with whatever pesticide or insecticide, herbicide, all of those. And it seems like that's a lot different there. And you also mentioned too, I forgot that there was like a row of yellow. You mentioned this before the podcast. Can you?
So I think that is in part due to the pushback of rural America and of the ecologically minded. A lot of these sites have a requirement, or at least have a strong expectation or a marketing benefit in order to plant some natives on site. The site that we're on, they put, I can't imagine how many dollars they spent in seed. I've looked a few different times on planting some natives here, and the native seed, might be $10, $20, $30, $40, $50 a pound, whereas, you can get, say, red clover for $3 a pound. So the price disparity is just absolutely huge. They put their money where their mouth is, planted tons and tons of natives out on site. And right now there are spots that the coneflower is all in bloom. And I mean, it's literally all you can see is just solid yellow. Walking through it, your boots end up all full of bugs and all the bees buzzing around and everything. It's really, really cool to see. I mean, I think that's probably more of the exception than the rule when it comes to solar sites. But the site that we're on is beautiful.
Well, you also said a really great point too, that you don't know if you're for or against solar panels, but you are for solar grazing. And I wholeheartedly, I think that's the best statement I've heard on this whole topic.
Right. I think it's very, very disappointing from my perspective to see the discussions that happen regarding solar panels. It's as though all of rural America is just convinced, hey, it's solar, it's bad. They'd see your camper out there with solar panels on top and be like, oh, solar panels bad. And it's just stupid, in my opinion, that if we're going to have discussions about this, like, let's talk about why it's bad. Is it bad because it's corporate consolidation, because these are big companies coming into the area that are taking wealth away? Well, what are we saying about ADM? What are we saying about JBS, about Smithfield, about what's happening on the opposite side of the fence, what's happening today rather than the perspective of what might happen tomorrow with these solar contracts? Are we worried about the next generation having an opportunity on the land? Because I really don't see other farming operations around that have an opportunity for the next generation to come back. Are we worried about the ecological implications? Because if you go walk through a cornfield, it's not a good ecological, there are no good ecological implications that are happening on the vast majority of the corn acres in this country. Are we worried about the energy? Because the majority of that corn is going into ethanol anyway. So if we would have these nuanced discussions, I think that we would start talking about, or at least thinking about, the implications of what is currently happening on the ground, rather than what the perspective is for these solar panels that may or may not come in. And it doesn't make sense to me that we're not talking about the issues that are occurring and how we can actually fix these issues. And instead we're just complaining about what additional issues might pop up, or what different issues that, in my opinion, aren't all that different than what we see already.
So you brought up the point on it's difficult for the next generations to take on, that's the next farm. But for you all, how are you guys going about that to avoid that ever happening?
I don't know that we can say how we're going to avoid it ever happening. I used to hold pretty harsh feelings toward the part-time farmers. The guys that had a spouse that worked in town full time, or that had their full-time job and they just farmed on the weekends and sold in the same sort of markets that we did. Because I felt that those guys had a huge leg up and that they actually had all of their costs covered. End of the day, if they sold stuff at a loss, it didn't really make any difference because they had money in the bank, they had health insurance and whatnot. But in last 5-10 years, I've realized that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So while they're subsidizing their farming operation, their farming hobby with a job in town, we're really subsidizing our pig raising hobby with a processing plant. Direct marketing, some of these other the tasks that aren't in any way production agriculture. And I think that production agriculture piece is only going to continue to get harder as time progresses. Grandpa survived for 30, 40 years on just raising animals, raised the crops to feed them, raised pigs and sold them into the local sale barn, bought in feeder steers, fed them out and sold them back into the sale barn. So, I mean, he was actually 100% legitimately production agriculture. His job was raising animals, wasn't getting into marketing and sales and all that, had some skills there, was smart enough to call around and see where he was going to get the best money on it. But the production agriculture element has continually gotten harder. And I think that finding ways that we can subsidize that production agriculture piece with things that we enjoy will be what continues to be difficult as time progresses. And I don't see any of those opportunities as being long-standing opportunities. Dad's time frame in the last 25, 30 years of the farm, the big subsidy piece for the farm has been through direct marketing and wholesale. And we'll see how long that continues to be a viable opportunity for us. I think that the solar grazing will be a viable opportunity for us to subsidize our lamb production opportunities. I don't know what the next thing will be. It's got to continue to be on the lookout and see what time brings, I guess.
What's it like now working with your father versus just growing up and, being the son, you still helped out, but you were also just a kid? I'm curious just what that relationship's been evolved over time like.
Yeah, I think that now is actually pretty similar to when I was a kid. And the dad kind of handed over, most of the time when I was a kid, dad handed over tasks. Things like the brooder barn. The brooder barn, I don't know how often dad went in the brooder barn when I was at school, but I had no expectation that he was going into the brooder barn, no need for him to go into the brooder barn. That was my thing. Me and my two sisters took care of the brooder. If there were issues, I straightened them out. And that was it. There were tasks beyond that he would pull me on to that we'd have to work together on. But by and large, I knew what was my responsibility. I took care of it and we stayed out of each other's way. And I think that it's come back to that. There's, farmers continue to farm. Farmers survive in this industry because they're very pig-headed and stubborn. I think that having two of those people side by side can create issues. And there's all sorts of consultants and books and everything imaginable solely on that topic of, farming families trying to work together. Dan and I have been fortunate that we haven't had lots of those issues because the operation has been large enough, divided enough. I moved into running the processing plant and dad moved out of his involvement in the processing plant. So we were never, butting heads, never warring on any of those sort of things. We very much work together. I mean, we work in the same businesses, obviously. But not a lot of day in, day out working side by side. I guess the dad has the things that he runs. I have the things that I run. And when either of us need help, we're happy to jump in to help each other, but by and large, we're working together separately, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So this is my last question I'll have about your father, because I don't want to just be the guy that's just asking all those questions. But I asked him yesterday a question about you and asked him what is one of his favorite things about you. And he mentioned, he said it was a good, but that could also be a bad thing, but is your work ethic. And it's kind of interesting saying the pig-headed, stubborn aspect. I just found that funny, but he was just saying that, you're just always working a lot and learning so much. I mean, that's why I showcased that in that YouTube video I watched, because it was about 30 minutes and it was clear how passionate and knowledgeable and curious you are about all of this. So I want to flip that question to you. What is one of your favorite things about your dad?
I think I've got to say that it's dad's passion for our operation as a whole, that there's not a single step in the process that dad hasn't completely thought out and completely made up his mind and his decisions as to how it should be, how it ought to be, and how he's going to put in the work to do that, whether that be something that he has to do here on the farm, connections that he has to make with other businesses to allow us to get chicks and to figure out the logistics of how to get product into different places, or as you may have seen, as he picks up his phone and gets phone calls from all over the place, picks up phone and calls up DC when something is wrong to straighten out this industry, not just for ourselves, but the other farms that we know of. He's constantly on the phone with people in DC trying to help out other small processors that have issues. He's incredibly passionate about this business, about this industry as a whole. He may talk down on my work ethic, but I think that he has just as many or more hours into everything that he does, if you count all of the hours that he's on the phone making phone calls to help others out in this industry as well.
See, that's what I love. It's clear you two you live, breathe all of this, and it just felt like that's why the whole work ethic comment I always find hilarious. I didn't mean that in a bad way either, because I'm the same way myself. It's your mind's constantly going to where you even mentioned it last night at dinner that there's always something that you could be doing. I mean, that's as a whole, just as a business owner, but especially for being a farmer and having to grow your own food and what all that entails. So that's just interesting to hear. Thank you for answering that. Wanted to transition a little bit back to the pigs actually, and just the whole pasture raised versus the whole CAFO environment and where we're at, because most pigs we have in America now are all in pens. Like you said, the only time they're outside is to see the aluminum cage to take them to more concrete. Is it possible to do 100% pasture raised pork and being able to do that anywhere, like geographically in America? Or because that's one thing I'm trying to really understand too, is the different geographies and climates around America and what that entails for one specific, say, animal like a pig.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that there are different requirements, there are different details you have to be more mindful of depending, in our case, the time of the year. But I would imagine that the same thing can be said for the different climates. Yeah, I mean, I don't see anywhere in the U.S. that it would be completely impossible. The wintering program is, of course, going to look significantly different depending on where you're at. The summer, dealing with heat is going to look different depending on where you're at. But, by and large, we see issues because it is too wet. The pigs start tearing things up when it's too wet. So we have to move them more rapidly if we get a heavy rainstorm so that they're not tearing up pasture, destroying sod. In drier climates, you wouldn't have the same implications there, that the pigs could be on a spot a little bit longer, but then you also might have different ecological implications by leaving those animals longer in one area, hurting those plants that may not recover as quickly. Same thing in the winter. We used to get good, hard, solid freezing, which I think was actually more conducive to running pigs outside over winter than what it is now, when it's kind of a rapid freezing and thawing process that just creates a whole bunch of mud. So I think that it could in ways be easier to winter pigs where you actually get a good, solid, hard freeze over winter. I don't see anywhere that's an obvious no, you can't raise pigs. I'm sure that there are places, probably some of the Southwest is probably too hot and dry to run pigs in profitably. But yeah, I don't see anywhere that would be impossible.
Continuing with pigs too, I talked this yesterday with Greg, but would love to hear your perspective too, because one thing from the consumer standpoint, I've noticed a lot of people have stopped eating pork entirely, and it makes sense when most grocery store pork is just absolutely disgusting. I have not bought pork from a grocery store. I can't remember last time. But then having pasture pork, and then especially the pork here, is good grief. I wish everyone could have access to that because it's so incredible. Genuinely, I'm not just trying to blow smoke up your ass. It was the best pork chop I've ever had, and it wasn't even really seasoned. It was just smoked, and that was it. And that's all you needed, because that just shows the quality and care you have for the pigs, and it displays that through the taste. But then the whole parasite conversation too is talked about a lot, especially on social media. And I'm curious just to hear what your thoughts on all of this, because now a lot of consumers just won't even give the thought to even visit or even think about pasture pork, because they have this all-encompassing viewpoint that they have parasites, but then also they're so human-like to where it's just, that's haram.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a marketing guy. I'm the wrong guy to ask if I'm being put on a pedestal to sell pork to anybody. The trichina risk. Trichina in the U.S., by my understanding, is not a legitimate issue unless you're eating undercooked bear meat. The trichina risk in pork is negligible, if not completely non-existent. Wouldn't necessarily use that as an excuse not to cook pork to 145 or so. But yeah, I don't think that the parasite risk is in any way legitimate. I completely agree that pork in most cases is nasty. If you've ever been into a pig barn and then you eat a conventional pork chop or bacon probably, some of the sausages, especially as they start getting towards the end of their shelf life, they taste like that barn that they were raised in. So I can't blame anybody that doesn't want to eat pork, that doesn't want to, try pastured pork because they've been ruined on conventional pork so much. I would urge them to do so. In my opinion, I don't see the meat that you get at the store as in any way being indicative of what is available out there. That, finding animals that are actually raised outside, that are fed appropriately, that are processed in a small processing plant, that are turned around fresh, that you get at the beginning of their shelf life rather than the end, is just a completely different dining experience than something that was raised 1,000 miles away in a barn, ran down a line at 1,000 head an hour, and then's been sitting in somebody's cooler for 3 weeks or a month before you get to eat it. Just not even the same product, in my opinion.
No, I've actually had conversations with friends too, where it literally made them physically sick from the pork from the grocery store, and then they stopped eating it for years, and finally tried some true pasture pork, and just mind blown, because not only did it taste better, and you didn't feel like crap, that you could actually digest it all.
I think the funniest one to me, and the one that I think gets people more riled up, and I don't really know why, but we've had several people that'll buy oddball cuts from us. Will buy hearts or livers or necks or whatever the case off the birds, because they feed them to their dogs, and they say that, oh, well, we ran out of your livers at one point, so we just ran down to Walmart or whatever and picked up a package of chicken livers, and the dog wouldn't eat them. That the dogs know that that stuff in the store isn't even food. I don't know why we can't wrap our heads around that.
I've seen so many videos of people doing things like that, and I've tried that with my neighbor's cat, to where I'll just put really gross food and he just walks away. Like, he'll sniff it and give like one lick and then just walk away immediately. And that should be very telling too. I think that's so funny how, again, we continue to be gaslit on our food system so badly, and it's such an easy solution for the consumer. Go visit a farm. It's just literally one day. It could be just a couple hours. One quick Google search. That's another thing that I find hilarious too, is people are like, I don't know what to do. We've got a supercomputer in our hands, so now I can literally don't even have to type and just say, where's a farm near me? And it'll just display everything. That's another really tough problem I think about a lot, is our outsourcing of responsibility to everything but ourselves. And the pandemic, in a lot of ways, woke us up to that, but in a lot of ways worsened it. And the government is obviously, they try to force that on us. That's why they create the solution and the problem, because they want to control us all, essentially. I already lost my train of thought. Crap. I was blanking so heavily. What did I just say at the beginning of that?
Personal responsibility.
Personal responsibility. And that's why I love going out and actually getting your hands in the dirt and mud. It's, again, something that it's so hard to really grasp if you're not doing it. But then to me, that really does lead to taking on more personal responsibilities. And going back to taking care of animals, that is huge for that, because what's so interesting, what the vegans always talk about, is how so many farmers and ranchers just abuse their animals, which, sure, there's some videos out there and there are certain people that do that. But at the same time, I just read 2 days ago of a farmer in Michigan. I'm mutual with him on Twitter, and he just tweeted out how he felt so terrible and really didn't sleep well because he accidentally hurt the back of a pig, and it was all his fault entirely, 100%. Farmers and ranchers truly care about their animals. They do not, it makes no sense at all in any angle that you try to take. And that just adds to the responsibility of, it could be biblical, but to me, that's also adding into being in charge of the domain of sheep and pigs and cows and whatnot. So that's why I'm trying to figure out how to get people onto the farm. I'm just curious from your perspective, how can we do that?
I honestly don't know. I mean, the reality of getting people out onto the farm is that it's an additional thing that you have to fit into your schedule that's already full.
Full of Netflix and YouTube.
Yeah. Well, from the farmer's perspective, to be able to create the easy opportunities to bring somebody in that has no experience.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Doesn't have the ability to do something, it's a different set of infrastructure. It's a different set of tour wagons or whatever the case is. The preparations that go into being able to host those type of events or whatnot, can be difficult. From the consumer's perspective, yeah, as you say, to take the time off of your Netflix subscription to go out and to visit somewhere shouldn't be a difficult thing to do, but it seems seems ever increasingly prevalent that people are looking for the end of Netflix rather than getting outside and doing anything. They're facing all of the health implications of doing so. How prevalent are the GLP-1 drugs now from the same people that, have couch cushions that are completely destroyed because they're sitting in front of a screen all day. So, it's the implications if people would take the time and step back and think about their life holistically and what they actually want to achieve. So if they want to be healthy, they want to get out and do things, they want to do this, that, and the next thing, the path that we are on in most people's cases completely opposite, completely backwards.
What does farming mean to you?
See, farming, if I were king for a day, the first thing that I would do is redefine agriculture to be the production of food, period. I feel bad as a sheep farmer saying that. Ours are hair sheep, so we're not shearing, we're not producing wool anyway. I feel bad for the guys producing wool, but that's a small portion of the industry. In my opinion, farming is the production of food. So I think that there are tons and tons of implications that can have. But for me, I see our operation here is very, very unique. My position here is very, very unique because I don't see any other obvious options out there in life that you can positively or negatively, but you can have a very significant impact on the ecology, on the environment, on the community, on the family, and on people that you don't even know as health. So I think that the strict definition of farming, in my opinion, would be the production of food, but there's so much more to it than that.
Because that was the reason why I asked that was just the next question from the conversation on just the responsibility and trying to get people on the land, because there's so many stories with the good, the bad, and the ugly of farming and how, the statistics don't lie either. The fact that we've lost 91% of hog farms since 1980, 89% of dairies, and all the other industries do trend towards that way too. But on the flip side, there's still you and folks like you and your father and so many others that love it despite all of that and still have so much hope and optimistic. And then hearing just that too, it just makes so much sense. I guess the final question on that, what keeps you going every day you wake up with all of that you're doing here and what I just said too, with just the current state of ag and how, from a political standpoint, it's very tough because of the big players and then the big corporations and then the other corporations like the Farm Bureau. There's just so much massive corruption, and it just feels like it's an uphill battle that can never be won. But at the same time, you're still getting up and doing the work. So what keeps you doing that?
I think I agree with that. It's an uphill battle that can't be won on the grander scale of things. We can go and we can petition and we can riot and we can post on social media. And are we actually going to change anything? Who knows? But I know that every day that I can wake up and I can have a positive impact on the environment, I can feed people. I can have a positive impact on the employees and on their families at home. I can do good here by being in farming in so many different facets that I just don't see as being a possibility in anything else that is out there to do.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. Really enjoyed this conversation, especially after talking with your dad yesterday and then being able to talk with you. I've really enjoyed it.
Good discussion.
Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more.